There is a particular kind of invisibility that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a door slamming or a name being called wrongly or a seat being left empty at a table. It arrives in the assumption, in the thing someone does not think to do because they have never had to think about it, because you have always already done it. My name is Claire Maddox. I am 38 years old. I am an urban planner living in Portland, Oregon, and for 11 consecutive years I organized every significant gathering my family held. Not because anyone asked, because no one else was going to, and I could, and I had taught myself very early that being the person who could was the closest thing to belonging I was going to find in that family. This is what happened the year my mother retired, and what I understood on the drive home, and what I did after. My mother, Sandra Maddox, spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Medford, Oregon. She is 63 years old. She is a woman of strong opinions and warm surface and the particular quality of people who are excellent with other people's children and somewhat less patient with their own. Her students loved her. They wrote her letters. 2 of them came to the retirement party, which tells you something about the kind of teacher she was. She has 3 children. My brother David is 41. He lives 12 minutes from my parents' house in Medford and has lunch with my mother every other Wednesday and is, by any external measure, the child she is closest to. Not because she loves him more, I want to be careful here, the way I am always careful here, but because he is present in the physical, proximate way that registers as closeness to a woman like my mother. He shows up. He calls first. He does not require her to reach. My sister Pam is 35. She lives in Ashland, 20 minutes south. She is sunny and uncomplicated in the way that middle children sometimes are when they have decided early that the easiest path through a family is to cause no friction. My mother finds her restful. I have always understood why. I am the oldest. I live in Portland, 3 hours north by car. I have lived there for 9 years since I took a position with the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability at 29, and the distance has been, in ways I did not fully understand until recently, the thing that made my role in this family possible to maintain. When you're not in the room, you become the person who manages the room from a distance. You become the logistics. You become the calls and the spreadsheets and the vendor contacts and the follow-up emails. You become, without anyone deciding this or naming it, the infrastructure. I started organizing family events the Christmas I was 27. My parents had mentioned in passing in October that they thought it would be nice to have everyone together that year, and then November came and went, and nothing had been arranged, and I called the restaurant and made the reservation and sent the family the details. That was how it started. Over the following 11 years I organized 8 Christmases, 6 Thanksgiving dinners, my parents' 35th and 40th wedding anniversaries, my father's 60th birthday, my grandmother's 85th birthday, 2 graduation dinners for David's children, a baby shower for Pam's first pregnancy, and various smaller gatherings that accumulated in the way that family gatherings accumulate when someone in the family is reliable enough to be taken for granted. I want to tell you what that looked like in concrete terms because I think the phrase organized family events does not carry sufficient weight on its own. For my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, I contacted for venues in Medford and drove down from Portland on a Saturday in February to visit 2 of them in person. I built a comparison document with photographs, pricing, parking notes, and a column for what each space would feel like at 60 people versus 40. I negotiated a group rate. I coordinated the guest list across 3 rounds of revision, which required 4 separate conversations with my mother's older sister, Aunt Ruth, who had strong feelings about seating proximity to her ex-husband's new wife and needed to be managed with a level of diplomatic precision I would later reflect had been genuinely underutilized in a family context. The week before the dinner, I called the restaurant to confirm the private room setup and discovered that the sound system they had promised was unavailable. I arranged a workaround with a Bluetooth speaker I drove down and delivered in person 2 days before the event. Nobody knew about the speaker. I did not mention it. For my father's 60th birthday, I found and booked a private room at a restaurant he had mentioned once, in passing, 8 months earlier in a phone call, as a place he had always wanted to try. I had written it down in the small notebook I keep on my desk at home, in the margin of the page where I had been sketching a land use zoning amendment I was working on, and the juxtaposition of those 2 things, city infrastructure and my father's offhand wish, did not strike me as strange at the time, which tells you something about how I organized my attention in those years. I called in February for a June event because I had learned from experience that private dining rooms in the better restaurants in Medford required that kind of lead time. The reservation coordinator, a man named Paul Eston, who I spoke with 3 times over the following 4 months, called me the week of the dinner to say one of my father's requested guests had a severe shellfish allergy and had not mentioned it when they RSVP'd. I renegotiated 2 courses of the fixed menu at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday from my office between back-to-back planning commission meetings. For Pam's baby shower, I drove down on a Friday evening after a full work week and spent Saturday morning setting up the venue, a small event space above a wine shop on Main Street in Ashland that I had found and booked 6 weeks earlier after Pam had mentioned, vaguely, that she thought something small and warm would be nice, and stayed until 4 p.m. when the last guest left, and then drove the 3 hours back to Portland alone, arriving home at 7:22 in the evening, and I mentioned that specific time because I remember sitting in my car in my building's parking garage for a few minutes before going inside, not from exhaustion, but from something quieter. A recognition, half-formed, that I was not entirely sure the shower had required my presence in the way I had arrived, or whether I had simply arrived because that was what I did and nobody had thought to say it wasn't necessary. Pam had texted me that afternoon while I was still at the venue stacking chairs. "You're the best, sis. Don't know what we'd do without you." I had replied with a heart and kept stacking. I did not examine that recognition carefully at the time. I put it back where it came from and went upstairs and unpacked. My mother announced her retirement in September. She had been thinking about it for 2 years, she said, and she had finally decided that 31 years was enough, and that she wanted to spend her mornings reading and her afternoons in the garden without the particular weight of other people's children on her conscience. She said this with a lightness that told me she had been sitting with the decision long enough that it had already become comfortable. I was happy for her. I want to say that plainly. My mother's career had been demanding in the specific way that teaching is demanding, not the hours only, but the emotional labor of caring consistently about the outcomes of 30 students at a time, year after year, and she had done it with a commitment that I genuinely admired. She had earned the retirement. I assumed, without examining the assumption, that I would organize the party. It was not a spoken arrangement. It had never been a spoken arrangement. It was simply the way things were, the way the road is simply there when you need to drive on it. I was the one who organized things. There was going to be a party. I would organize it. I called my mother in early October to begin the conversation. She was warm and slightly distracted in the way she is when she is already in the middle of something. We talked for about 20 minutes, about the retirement, about her plans, about a garden project she was considering, and at no point did she mention the party. I did not push. I told myself she was still processing the transition, and that when she was ready to start planning, she would call. She did not call. October passed. November passed. I called twice in November, and we talked about Thanksgiving, which I was organizing, and about my father's back, which had been troubling him since he had strained at moving a garden bed in September, and about a documentary she had watched about a woman who had cycled across New Zealand at 72, and at no point did she mention a retirement party. I remember noticing this and filing it away under the category of things I was giving time. In December, I mentioned it directly. I said I was thinking we should start planning something for the spring, that I was happy to take the lead if she wanted, that we should probably book a venue soon if we were thinking of April or May. I had, in fact, already pulled up the Orchard Table's website the previous week. I had noted they had a private room that held 60. I had checked their availability calendar. I had not made any calls yet because I had learned from experience that starting without the conversation made the process feel imposed rather than shared, and I was trying to do it differently. She said that sounded like a good idea. She said she would think about what she wanted. She did not call about it in December. She did not call in January. I called in February. She said she had been thinking about it, and she was picturing something simple, maybe 40 people, a nice restaurant, nothing too complicated. I said that sounded lovely, and asked if she wanted me to start looking at venues. She said she thought David had already looked into a couple of places. I remember the pause I took after she said that. Not a dramatic pause. A brief, private moment of recalibration, the kind you do internally when something does not fit the shape you had prepared for it. I said that was great, and asked if she wanted me to get involved, coordinate with David, take on any part of the planning. She said she thought they had it handled, but she would let me know. She did not let me know. I found out about the party on a Friday evening in April at 9:03 p.m. when my mother sent a text to the family group chat, a group that included David, Pam, their spouses, my father, and me with the details. The date, the venue, the time. A restaurant in Medford called the Orchard Table. Saturday, May 11th, 6:30 p.m. 47 guests. I read the message standing in my kitchen in Portland in the clothes I had worn to work, holding my phone, with a particular quality of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the mind encountering something it needs a moment to process. I scrolled up in the group chat. There was no previous thread about the party. No planning conversation I had been left out of. Just this message, arriving complete, as though it had simply occurred. I opened a direct message to my mother. I typed, "Mom, this is wonderful. Quick question. When did you start planning? I would have loved to help." She replied 4 minutes later. "Oh, sweetheart, David and Pam wanted to do something for me, so I let them take the lead. I didn't think you'd want the fuss, with being so far away and so busy with work. You do so much for this family already." I read it 3 times. I want to tell you what those 3 readings felt like because the first one and the third one were different, and the difference matters. The first time I read it, I felt the thing I have felt many times in my family, a brief, bright flare of something I did not have a clean word for. Not anger, exactly. The feeling of standing outside a room you have furnished and being told the door was left unlocked for your convenience. The second time I read it, I noticed the specific phrase she had used. "I didn't think you'd want the fuss." Not, "We wanted to give you a break." Not, "We thought you deserved to be a guest for once." She had decided, on my behalf, that I would not want to be involved. She had decided this about the daughter who had driven to Medford for a baby shower setup and driven home at 7:22 in the evening and sat in a parking garage and not said anything to anyone. The third time I read it, I understood something I had been approaching for a long time without quite arriving at it. She was not wrong about the fuss. I would have taken on the fuss. I had always taken on the fuss. What she had done, without knowing she was doing it, was reveal the way she understood my role in this family. I was the one who handled the fuss, so that other people did not have to. I was not, in the way she had organized her thinking, someone who was invited in. I was someone who was deployed. She genuinely believed she had done me a kindness. I put the phone face down on the counter and filled the kettle and stood at the window looking at the lights of the building across the street while it heated.
"Tell me something.
What time is it where you are right now? Is it morning still, or has the day already taken something from you?" I ask because what I am about to tell you, the part about the party itself, is easier to hear when you are somewhere that belongs to you. I went to the party. I want to say that clearly because I think there is a version of this story where the protagonist does not go, where the not going is the statement, and that version is valid, but it is not my version. I went because my mother was retiring after 31 years and I loved her, not cleanly or simply, but in the complicated way you love someone whose limitations have shaped you, and I was not going to let what had happened become a reason to miss the occasion itself. I drove down from Portland on the afternoon of May 11th. 3 hours. I arrived at my parents' house at 4:47 p.m. to help, out of habit, with whatever needed doing before the party. My mother was in the kitchen with Pam. The kitchen smelled like the specific combination of her perfume and coffee and the lavender she keeps in a small ceramic pot on the windowsill, and she turned when I came in and said, "Claire, you made it," with the warmth and mild surprise of someone who had not entirely expected me to be early. I said I had thought I could help with anything that needed doing. She said Pam had it handled, but I could pour myself a glass of wine if I wanted. I poured a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table and watched my mother and sister move through a preparation I had not been part of and was not needed for. The restaurant was 10 minutes away. We arrived at 6:15. The Orchard Table had a private room in the back that held 50 people comfortably, with warm Edison lighting and exposed brick and small vases of ranunculus on each table, white and pale peach, which I knew were my mother's favorite because I had noted it years ago in the same mental file where I kept everything about everyone in my family.
Pam had chosen them.
They were exactly right. I stood near the entrance for a moment and took that in, the specific feeling of seeing something you would have done by someone else, done correctly, and I thought that this was going to be the complicated texture of the entire evening, and I was right. My brother David had booked the room. I know this because I asked the restaurant's events coordinator, a young woman named Sasha Brent who was moving between tables checking settings, whether she had worked with a family before. She said no, this was the first event, that a David Maddox had arranged everything about 3 months ago and had been wonderful to work with. She said it with the easy warmth of someone describing a smooth professional interaction, and I thanked her and said I was glad to hear it. 3 months ago, February. The same week I had offered to help, and my mother had said she thought David had looked into some places. I found my seat at a table near the window. I was seated between my father and a woman named Helen Marsh, who had been my mother's closest colleague at the school for 22 years. Helen was warm and funny and spent the first 20 minutes telling me about a student my mother had stayed late for 3 times a week for an entire semester, a boy named Marcus Teo who had been struggling and who my mother had refused to give up on, and who had gone on to study education himself, and who had emailed her the previous month to say he was now teaching at an elementary school in Bend. I listened to this story and felt, without complication, proud of my mother. Whatever was complicated about the evening, my mother had been a good teacher for 31 years. Those two things could exist at the same time. I had learned that carrying one did not require putting down the other. The room filled by 6:45. 47 people, the way my mother's text had said. I found myself, out of habit, noting the things I would have done differently. The way the bar setup created a slight bottleneck near the entrance, the table in the back corner that was positioned just far enough from the main conversation that the couple seated there spent the first hour looking slightly adrift. Small things. The kind of things nobody notices until they have organized enough events to know where friction hides. I noticed them, and I let them go. They were not mine to fix. The party was genuinely a good party. This is the part of the story that is complicated to tell because it would be easier if it had been a disaster, if the venue had been wrong or the food poor or the evening flat. It was none of those things. David had chosen well. The room was warm. The food was good. My mother's former students, a man named Gregory Holt who now taught at a university in Eugene and a woman named Lisa Tran who worked in public health in Portland, gave short, genuine speeches about what my mother had meant to them, and my mother cried in the way she cries, quickly and without apology, and then laughed at herself. My father gave a toast. He talked about 31 years of watching her come home from work and grade papers at the kitchen table and still find energy for the people around her. He said she was the most consistent person he had ever known. He said her name 4 times in 4 minutes, and each time it landed with the specific warmth of a man who has loved someone for a long time and knows it. David spoke. He thanked everyone for coming and said organizing the evening had been his way of saying what he was not always good at saying out loud. He looked at my mother when he said it. She reached over and squeezed his hand. Pam spoke briefly and warmly and said something about how her mother had always made home feel like a safe place, which was true, and which I did not know how to hold in the same hands as everything else I was holding that evening. Nobody asked me to speak. I do not know whether this was an oversight or a decision. I have turned that question over many times since that evening, and I have not arrived at a clean answer. What I know is that I sat at a table at a party for my mother, and I watched my brother and sister stand up and be the people who had made it happen, and I was the guest. After 11 years of making things happen, I was the guest at the one party that was not mine to make. My Aunt Ruth was there, seated carefully away from my uncle's ex-wife's cousin, a placement that I noticed immediately because I would have made the same call. She found me near the end of the evening and held my arm and said, very quietly, "You always made these evenings what they were, Claire. I hope you know that." She said it and then moved on the way people say the true thing and then give you space to sit with it, which is the only dignified way to say the true thing. I thanked her. I held on to it. The party ended at 10:30. I helped carry a few boxes of cards and flowers to my parents' car because it was in front of me to do, and I did not know how to stop being the person who did the things that were in front of her to do. Then I hugged my mother. She smelled like her perfume and a little like the wine, and she held me for a moment and said, "I'm so glad you came all this way, sweetheart." I said I was glad too. I got in my car at 10:44 p.m. For the first hour I drove without thinking much, the highway dark and familiar, the radio off, the particular quiet of a long drive at night that is different from any other quiet. Somewhere past Salem, around 11:14 p.m., I became aware of something. It was not a revelation in the sharp sense. It arrived the way things arrive when you have been approaching them for a long time, not as a sudden light but as the recognition that you have already been standing inside something for longer than you realized. I had been useful to my family for 11 years. I had been the one who made things happen, who held the details, who drove the 3 hours and stayed until the end and drove back and sat in the parking garage at 7:22 in the evening and did not say anything. I had built every gathering they had enjoyed, and I had built them well, and they had been enjoyed, and not once in 11 years had anyone said, "Claire, what would you like this to look like? Claire, is this too much? Claire, would you rather just come and sit down?" They had not asked because they had not thought to ask. And they had not thought to ask because I had never indicated, by word or action, that there was a version of me who wanted to be asked. I had simply arrived and handled things and left and arrived again, and the family had learned me as that, only that, and my mother had internalized it so completely that she had genuinely believed, in her warm and limited way, that excluding me from her retirement party was a gift. I thought about Helen Marsh telling me the story about Marcus Teo. My mother had stayed late 3 times a week for an entire semester for a child who needed her to stay. She had that capacity. She had always had that capacity. She simply had not turned it in my direction, not because she was incapable of it, but because I had never given her reason to believe I needed it. I had been too capable, too early, too consistently for too long. Something inside me went very still on that highway. Not cold, not hard. Still, the way water goes still after a long disturbance, when the surface finally has nothing left to respond to. I thought about what it would mean to stop. Not dramatically. Not as a statement or a withdrawal or a punishment. Simply to stop being the person who built the things and started being the person who came and sat down. To let the next gathering be arranged by whoever arranged it, and to arrive as a guest, the way my brother arrived, the way my sister arrived, the way everyone else had always arrived, and to see what happened. I thought about that for the remaining 40 minutes of the drive. I did not talk myself out of it. I did not add qualifiers or exceptions or give myself an out. I just let it be true. I got home at 12:09 a.m. I poured a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window and looked at the city below, Portland on a Saturday night, lights and movement, and the particular way the city looks when you have spent the day somewhere else and returned to the place that is actually yours. I called my friend Joanna Marsh the next morning. Joanna and I have been friends since graduate school at Portland State, where we sat next to each other in a land use policy seminar and spent most of the second half of the semester passing notes about the professor's increasingly Baroque PowerPoint transitions. She is one of the few people in my life who says the difficult thing without either softening it or making it larger than it is. I told her about the text at 9 p.m., the message, the party, the drive home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, what would the last 11 years have looked like if you had been a guest the whole time?" I thought about it honestly.
"Different," I said. "For who?" she said.
I sat with that.
"For everyone," I said.
"But mostly for me."
"Yeah," she said.
"I've been waiting for you to get there." I did not call my mother that week. I did not call the week after. On the 3rd Sunday, she called me. She asked how the drive back had been. She asked about work. She asked if I had liked the restaurant. I said the restaurant had been lovely and David had done a wonderful job. She said she was so pleased it had all come together. I said as evenly as I could, "Mom, I want to say something. Not to make the evening smaller than it was, because it was a good evening. But I need you to know that when you told me you didn't think I'd want the fuss, that was 11 years of organizing every gathering this family has had, and the assumption you made about me in that message wasn't a kindness. It was the way you actually understand my role in this family. And I've been thinking about whether I want to keep filling that role." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought you were so busy." "I know you didn't mean anything by it," I said. That's exactly what I've been sitting with. She did not have an answer for that. We ended the call without resolution, the way these calls end when one person has said a true thing and the other person needs time to decide whether to receive it. My mother is not a woman who turns a corner quickly. She may not turn this one at all. I've stopped organizing my expectations around which way she turns. What I have done is simpler and more difficult at the same time. The following October, when my parents mentioned they were thinking of having people over for Thanksgiving, I said I was happy to come. I said I would bring wine, and I would need someone to send me the time and address. My mother laughed as though I had made a joke. When she realized I had not, there was a brief silence, and then she said she would have David send the details. David sent the details. Thanksgiving happened. It was organized by my mother and David, and it was slightly chaotic, and the turkey was 20 minutes late, and the seating was informal in a way that my arrangements never were, and it was, in its imperfect and unoptimized way, a family dinner. I arrived with wine. I sat down. I ate. I talked to my father about the bridge rehabilitation project I had been consulting on in East Portland. I talked to my aunt about her garden. I helped clear the table afterward because it was in front of me to do, and there are some habits that are worth keeping. I did not organize anything, and the world did not end. And the dinner happened anyway, and I drove home at 8:47 p.m. and got there before midnight for the first time in years. There are things you carry for so long that you forget they have weight. You forget there was a time before the carrying. You forget that the people who handed you the load did not do so after asking whether you could hold it. They simply let go, and you caught it, and you have been carrying it ever since and calling that choice. Being needed is not the same as being wanted. Useful is not the same as loved. 11 years of showing up is not the same as being seen. Not unless the people you are showing up for have ever once turned around to look at who is standing there. I still go to Medford. I still sit at my mother's table. I still call on Sundays, though I no longer call to follow up on the things I used to follow up on. I have handed back the infrastructure, quietly, piece by piece, and I am watching my family learn, slowly, and with some difficulty, that the road was not always just there. My mother called me in January to ask if I knew a good venue in Medford for my cousin's bridal shower. I said I hadn't been in Medford often enough lately to have current recommendations, but that a Google search for private events rooms would be a reasonable place to start. She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a small surprised laugh. Fair enough, she said. That was enough. That was exactly enough. If you have been the one who handled the fuss, the one who was never asked if you wanted to be the one who was simply assumed into the role because you were capable and you did not say no, I want to ask you something gently. When was the last time someone in your family organized something for you? Not for the occasion. For you. Because they wanted you to be the one who arrived and sat down and was simply fully there? And if you cannot remember, what has it cost you? All these years of making sure everyone else could remember theirs?